Hi everyone, you're watching M4G Advocacy Media. This is the Journey Series video podcast. I'm Mark, a brown man who's bald with a black and white beard, and today I'm wearing a um blue check shirt, and I'm in my home office.
And I'm Crystal. Today I'm wearing a red, white, and black sweater, even though it's Texas and it's 80 degrees, but it was like 40 this morning. And so, anyway, so I'm wearing that, and I have brown hair, brown eyes, and today I'm wearing my red glasses, and I'm also at my home office.
And today we're speaking with Dwayne Robertson, who is the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Strategist at YPO, or the Young Presidents Organization. Hi, Dwayne.
Hello, Mark, Crystal. Thank you so much for having me on your great program
Thank
with
you
the
for
podcast.
joining us.
As I said, my name is Dwayne Robertson. I'm wearing an off-white button-up shirt with blue patterns, but for the purposes of what you're seeing on the screen or what you're hearing, it's just white. I have a goatee that's a little ball spot here, and also sitting in my home office, and I have brown
So,
eyes as well.
so go ahead, Dwayne. Tell us a bit more about your journey and what led you up to the point you're at now.
So yes, the interesting thing is that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is actually a second career field for me, but it's actually directly related to my first. And you're probably thinking, what does that mean? Well, my background is actually in health policy. So I have a master's in public health. I have an undergraduate degree in public policy as well. And I started my career working in government service. And actually, that is the natural tie-in to not only diversity, equity, and inclusion, but my passion for advocating for individuals with disabilities. I first started my career working in government service, specifically for the New York State government, both in a state agency in policy development and lobbying, and also for the New York State legislature. Now, specifically for the New York State legislature, my portfolio included all the health related agencies and also all the agencies related to individuals with developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, and also people with mental health challenges. So I approach this work and my advocacy from that viewpoint in terms of the work that I did policy wise, but then also as an on the ground, first, I would say direct care worker. Because while I was in college, I worked for an organization that specialized in allowing individuals with physical and developmental disabilities to be placed in the community. So I was actually one of the community related workers who had clients and assisted them with going shopping, applying for jobs, and a number of other daily life related activities. So I can speak about my passion from being a frontline worker and then also working on policy as well. And I think it's also important to add my background as well. Um, I grew up in the state of Connecticut, but I'm actually an immigrant to the United States. I came here when I was 5 years old. I was originally born on the island of Jamaica. I'm now a naturalized US citizen. So my
Ah,
vantage point about our society and this work
yeah.
cuts across many different lenses, and I would say
Mhm.
many different aspects of life. Hopefully I covered everything.
That's
Sure.
Yeah, that sounds great, Dwayne. You mentioned that the policy work and the more hands-on work you did. What were the differences you found between the two, and or among the people you were interacting with in those two different environments? What did you feel their misunderstandings may have been about the other side?
That's an excellent question. I will start from my personal underground experiences. To be quite honest, before I started at that position and I worked for about 2 years in undergrad, I really never worked directly or had direct interactions with individuals that identify either as having a physical or mental or psychological disability. But from those experiences, a number of things I learned. One, I learned to have great respect for my clients because not one of my clients ever felt sorry for themselves. They never tried to position themselves as a victim, and they tried to be as independent as possible. And I made sure that I was able to develop working relationships with them that aided them in that process. And it also made me realize that the human spirit is very powerful. Some of my clients were not able to speak. Some of them were not able to walk or do certain aspects of daily living. But again, at the end of the day, they were human. And even for the ones that weren't able to speak verbally, they still spoke with me and I was still able to speak with them. So for me personally, working one-on-one with my clients was a very humbling experience. It caused me to have a lot of respect for my fellow humans that unfortunately some people in our societies do not respect or look at them as not fully human or not fully adult. And I will
Right.
also say as well, it made me an advocate for their inclusions in society, in terms of educational opportunities, employment opportunities, and being also living in the community, preferably among their family members and friends, but if not, for them to have opportunities to live in the community because they are equal citizens in our society. And that passion and that insight really affected the work that I did. As I mentioned, I worked for the New York State Legislature. I was actually a policy analyst. So I worked hand in hand with elected officials who were responsible for developing policy and also making budget, money recommendations towards these programs. And I can definitely say that my insights that I had, also working
Right.
with advocates as well,
Mhm.
worked with many different advocacy organizations, lobbyists, and also fellow elected officials, it helped me to understand that this wasn't just an exercise. The decisions that we were collectively making around these policies, around this funding, impacted individuals within our community. It either directly impacted the clients, such as the clients that I worked with, their family members, caregivers, and the important not-for-profit organizations and advocacy organizations that were doing the work on their behalf in the community.
Right. That's I love that kind of stuff. It's interesting. I was wondering if you can personally speak on the differences in inequality of the services that people are given and the things that they are able to do and be a part of because of that. When they are not given the same opportunities, they're not given the same confidence to be able to work with people and share their ideas and things like that. What can you say about that?
I could say from the conversations that I've had with clients, friends, individuals that have worked in the industry, and also policymakers, when we don't create opportunities for our fellow citizens to be full participants in our society, there are negative outcomes for all of us. Of course, it affects those individuals who feel that they are being treated differently, they're being shunned, they're being isolated. But to your point, we're also denying opportunities to individuals who may, because of their life experiences, have an innovative approach to looking at life, or may be able to help organizations do their work that much better. As I mentioned before, I'm a big advocate for making sure that all Americans or all people in our society are fully integrated and have opportunity. And I can definitely say that, for example, I noticed that a number of organizations, for example, the town that I live in, such as a number of the local grocery stores or a number of the local hardware stores, such as Lowe's or Home Depots, have programs that allow individuals with certain types of disabilities to be employed. And I can personally see that one, those individuals that are working in those positions feel fulfilled in having that opportunity. But just as importantly, I can see how their colleagues also value that they're there in terms of not only their support, but even their approach to dealing with sometimes difficult customers, and sometimes stressful work environments. So again, the way how I look at things is that the worst case scenario in terms of individuals not being able to participate in society and how that negatively affects all of us, as opposed to looking at it the other way, where I see great efforts that are being made by government, by politicians, by not-for-profit organizations, advocates, and just as importantly, the individuals who do identify as having a physical or psychological disability and how they are advocating for themselves to be full participants in our society.
Mhm. So
That-
in our go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. In our pre-discussion, you brought up something that I find really interesting, and Mark and I have talked a lot about, and that is how the younger generations and people are demanding equality and those kind of things to be implemented and baked into your business and how you do things in your procedure, how you everything. There's nothing they haven't demanded they had to be a part of, and you were able to explain that a lot better. Can you do it again, please?
I think I will try.
Okay.
Because I think we talked about there were a number of great things that we talked about during our
Yeah, we did,
conversation.
but
So I think it's also important to point out that and all humans do this, right? We all make assumptions about others, we make assumptions about situations, we make assumptions about environment. But I think it's very important when we're talking about individuals who identify as having a physical, psychological, or mental disability that they don't look one way. Even with a number of my colleagues that I've developed good rapport, like a very good rapport with, I've come to discover that some of them do have physical disabilities. Some of them do have psychological disabilities, but on the face of it, you would never realize that. And I think because of that fact, when you were talking about younger generations, there's a greater acknowledgement that this little box that many times that we try to put people in is not necessarily true. And anyone we encounter, anyone that we care about, anyone that we value, could be a person that that identifies with having some type of disability. But it's all about how they express themselves, right? Whether they want to tell the world that, or if they look at it as something that they need assistance with, or they need outside advocacy for. So I think because of that, younger generations do really realize, like, hey, wait a minute. I want all the people around me to have the same opportunity as I do. And just as importantly, in the workplace, I think everyone else should just have the opportunity to hear their voice heard and have the opportunity to contribute. So I think that when we think about this, it's really the young people that are really leading this change.
yeah. Well, I think it's important for, I think it's amazing that, the younger generations can see that and are, maybe demanding is not the right word. I mean, just craving it, I think is a better word.
I think
Oh,
as
dear.
Americans, we have a
The
right to expect.
demanding
Yeah,
demanding was a good word. I thought.
I,
Respect.
yeah, both of those. Um, while we don't want to dismiss that because those are awesome attributes to have, and goals to go to work, at the same time, we have to realize that the older generations have worked so hard, a lot of them, to get where they are, and they're fearful of losing power and losing financial status and things like that. And giving everyone a seat at the table is going to mean losing those powers. So, we have to understand why they're feeling like they feel
Right.
and work together to come try to work together to remedy those things, because there were some good things about the past and there's some horrible things about the past and there's some really good things in the future as well. So, it's only going to be a certain amount of people that are able to come at the middle and try to figure out how to intertwine those things, as opposed to where people are going to push back and say, no, we're not doing that. And you talked about that. We all did. Talked about the where DI stands and people trying to take that out and change the acronym and everything else. That's obvious. People are scared.
Yeah, I think unfortunately where we are as a society, there's a lot of fear, and I don't want to say on both sides, but I think for all the interested stakeholders in the topic of DEI or disability advocacy, unfortunately, a lot of our actions are being driven by fear. You make a good point about older generations who have a particular place in life or have resources or have power or influence. And some of them might be afraid that they're losing that. But my response to that is at the end of the day, you can't stop change. Whether you like the change or not, you can't stop it. And we clearly see that our society is changing. The question is, where is that change going to take us? And I think this is where the opportunity is. We are all stakeholders in this country. We all live here. We all pay, most of us at least, most of us pay taxes, but we all contribute to the success or the failure of our society. So for those who operate in fear, I say to them, you can look at it from a fearful perspective, or you can look at it from the perspective of, I'm a stakeholder in this. How do I work? How do I have conversations with other people to figure out the future together? And that is the truth. You bring up the other important point about how DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is viewed. Some people see it as great, other people see it as bad. And you know what? Everyone has a right to have their own personal opinion. I may not necessarily agree with your opinion, but I believe that you have a right to have an opinion. We don't have to see eye to eye. But the question is, if you think that our nation, our society is a land of opportunity, if you believe that this is the best country in this world, how can I work with you to make sure that we all live up to that bigger vision? Whether we call it DEI or not, we don't have
I
to,
don't care what you call it, just do the right thing.
because as we were discussing earlier, when we're talking specifically about individuals that have physical or psychological or mental disabilities, by having them participate in society on a greater level, providing them with educational opportunities, providing them with employment opportunities, providing them with opportunities to be in the community, not tucked off in the corner somewhere, living with their families, living with their loved ones, in the community, that makes society much better. And I don't think that anyone would argue against that. So if we can acknowledge that this is good for society as a whole, where we're talking about one specific population, why can't we all collectively acknowledge that benefits society as a whole, regardless of what population we're talking about, right? Because at the end of the day, we all live here. And I also want to bring this up as well, because I think a lot of Americans are feeling apprehensive about the elections and where it's taking this country, regardless if they supported the person that won or not. And again, I say to them, we are all part of this process. Your responsibility as an American citizen didn't end on election day. You still have a responsibility to advocate for what you believe is right. You still have an obligation to pay attention to what's happening, and you still have an obligation to hold our elected officials accountable, regardless of what party they're affiliated with. So, are there certain people that are attacking diversity, equity, inclusion? Yes. But what is my responsibility? What is your responsibility, Crystal? What is your responsibility, Mark? It's our responsibility to have these conversations, advocate for what we believe in, and try to create middle ground with the people who don't agree with us. I can tell you in my current job role, one of the things that I do the most is talk to people who are against DEI. I talk to fellow coworkers. I talk to members who are against DEI. And it helps me to understand where they're coming from, because even if I don't agree with them, they still have legitimate concerns. And if I can address those concerns and say, hey, well, you do understand that these programs are not about taking opportunity away from one group, but it's actually creating opportunity for all. Because if we're addressing these fundamental problems in our organization, in our society, you don't think you benefit from that? And they're like,
Right.
oh, I've never thought about it that way. Now, I'm gonna be honest, it doesn't work in every situation, and we shouldn't expect that
Right.
it's gonna work
Right.
in every situation.
Mhm.
But we all have an obligation as Americans living in the society who wants the best for this country to have these conversations. I feel like I've done too much talking.
Yeah.
No, 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 thank
No,
you. Yeah.
it's all good. I think in a weird kind of way, or maybe it's the weird kind of way my brain works, and I like I like a good underdog story. Like give me a good boxing movie or a movie about some kids that nobody think will make it and they end up winning some championship. I love those kind of movies, right? But and in a weird way, the position we're in is actually a good thing and an opportunity for us to become better advocates and everything we need to do. Whereas, and it's the right position for those people we don't like to be where they are because they're going to become, because of the nature of who they are, they're going to become complacent. They're going to do all these things that show us who they really are. And then
Yeah.
they're going to give us the opportunity to become stronger and eventually knock them out,
Mhm.
right?
That's a good
Right.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So everything I've been through, I have a something I follow and it's called let them.
Mm.
It's let them show you who they are. Let them show you what they're really about and what kind of morals they really have and ethics, and that works as well for politics, let it play out, let their theatrical politics, uh, let that all play out and show you, reveal to you what you're supposed to, your purpose is, and let that drive your purpose. I mean, um, you know, not siding with anybody, but at the same time, pay attention and, you know, let it guide you to what you're supposed to be doing, and the right people will come to you and help you advocate and help you uh, drive home what you're trying to do, working together collaboratively, you know.
And
Agreed.
to Crystal's earlier point, where she was talking about being people like us being seen as demanding, right? Um, it I think it goes with the nature of the way things work. Sometimes people in control and power, one of their tactics that they use, whether it's between men and women or between two people of race that's more privileged and one that's less privileged, or between non-disabled people and people with disabilities, usually the people who are trying to advocate for their own rights and the rights of other people are they hear stuff like, oh, you're too sensitive, or that. And as far as women goes, there's a whole host of names that they've been saddled with, or people of different ethnicities, because it's an attempt to suppress
Yeah,
you from actually saying the truth
Mm.
and getting
agreed.
your
Right.
point.
But I
You're
go
And
back.
frozen.
we just, like Chris was saying, we just have to keep vigilant and let them do whatever they're gonna do.
Yeah.
And you make a very good point on how, you know, the quote unquote powers that be at times tries to minimize our experience. And I say our, depending on who the stakeholder group is. In this case, it's
Right.
individuals who are advocating for those with physical or developmental disabilities, etc. But
Mm.
what I like to do, and I think, and I encourage all advocates, because at the end of the day, if we live in a democracy, how can you be demanding in a democracy?
Mm.
You are a citizen. You are a voting citizen. You're a tax-paying citizen. Your citizen is contributing to the betterment of our society. So how can you be too demanding? That's my first question. I
Right.
and I go back to my days working as a policy analyst. As I said, I would meet with individuals from the community. I would meet with advocates. I would meet with lobbyists. I would meet with everyday citizens. And for me personally, I would never adopt that mind frame because at the end of the day, government is supposed to be here to represent the interests of the people. Now, again, I may not necessarily agree with everything that you're saying, but I'm never going to say that you're too demanding because you're supposed to demand from your government. Your government takes a lot from you, doesn't it? And I think,
Mm.
secondly, when these individuals try to use these tactics, this is where we have to fall back on truth because truth in the long run always wins out. So people
Yes.
call you demanding, like I said, flip it around. As a tax-paying citizen, I don't have a right to expect of my government. People say that
Mhm.
you're too sensitive. Well, you can always say, isn't there something that you're passionate about? Are you passionate about your
Mhm.
kids? Are you passionate about the
Mhm.
neighborhood you live in? Are you passionate about your safety? There is always something that every person out there is passionate about. And when you touch on that topic, and if you try to say that they're being sensitive, they would push back.
Yeah.
I say this to say that to your point, Mark, we have to be aware of how certain interests will try to minimize either a person's individual experience or what they believe is important. But I always encourage advocates to anchor their talking points and anchor their agenda in what we all believe in. We all believe in a democracy. We all believe in a freedom of speech. We all believe in having our interests represented. And if anybody tries to push back against them, to your point, we're seeing the truth.
Right. I think it's also important to bring up and to understand how the government works and how uh, it's in their best interest to divide and conquer, like to pit you and I against each other, right? Because that's going to make their job easier when we're all have that cognitive dissonance and we think we hate you and you hate me and and I don't help your interest and you don't help mine. That helps. That helps their narrative, right?
Agreed.
And as we were talking earlier about collaborating and coming together to advance societies, um, we have to first understand that
Good point.
those systemic things that were meant to divide us and hurt us and were built into our psyche, and we're having to unlearn a lot of those prejudices and ableism and all those things. Um, that is a very something that was very implanted into governments and leaders, from for a long time, years, decades, centuries.
Yeah, it's very, very much a systemic problem that's a byproduct of our progression through history, and it's essentially left us with a two-party system, and that's all fun and good because it's a democracy after all, and actually we should have more than two, but that's neither here nor there. But often the argument is gets stuck on, oh, I'm part of this tribe or I'm part of that tribe, and we're not gonna entertain you because instead, like, I'm a big fan of Sherlock Holmes, and he says whenever you find opposing viewpoints, the truth is likely somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
So let's come together and say, okay, you people over there have these good points that we like and these points that we don't really like. Now tell us what you think about us, and let's work together and figure out how to go forward.
Yeah.
Right.
I think both of you bring up some very good points, how unfortunately some politicians and some governments do rule through divide and conquer. And unfortunately, how many of us actually play into that. Like Mark, you said, you're a part of this tribe, I'm a part of this tribe. And the unfortunate thing is that at the end of the day, we all have differences, right? Differences in life experiences, how we look, what we think is right. But when we get beyond that, and you can actually see another person just as a human, you start to realize that you have more in common with the person that's on the other
Mhm.
side than you do have differences. And many of these differences are actually not important. And many of these differences are being played up by the media and these politicians, to your
Yeah.
point, which is around dividing and conquering. And you make me think about a lot of the fallout that's happened post-election, which I think is not good for the American people as a whole, where I'm hearing, depending on how people have voted, people are cutting their family members off, friendships are ending, certain cases, people are threatening divorce, and I don't think that's right. I personally believe that we all have a right to think differently about things. I have friends who voted differently than me. I don't agree with how they voted, but that's their experience. Am I going to cut them off? No, because at the end of the day, and I wish more people would be honest with themselves about this. It's good to have people around you who don't necessarily see the world the way that you do, because that's an opportunity to learn. As you said, Mark, when there's two different differences, you have two different perspectives. The truth is somewhere in the middle, but the key word is the middle, because there's always a middle ground. And I think as a society, we no longer seek the middle ground. We just choose to say, this is my position. If you're not in my position, you're wrong. And I go back to the conversations I have with my fellow staff members, with our members. And again, many things that I talk to them about, I personally don't agree with, but it's an educational experience. It may, in certain cases, help to evolve my way of thinking about certain things. But just as importantly, it helps me to understand where they're coming from, because even if I don't agree with you, in most cases, the opposite side is quite logical in what they're saying. You don't have to agree with it, but you can like, oh, okay. And for me personally, that's where I use it to be able to create that middle ground that Mark is talking about.
Right. When I was talking about being able to understand where people are coming from like older generations, they're scared of losing their financial securities,
Yeah.
they worked really hard for it. And so they maybe voted for the economy, right? And that's a very valid concern, and it was kind of like it was a balance. So what do I do? So being able to understand people's wanting to do what's right for them and not judging what they're doing, but understanding why they did what they did.
Yeah. Creates understanding and also helps to humanize the person, right? They're not some quote unquote lunatic or quote unquote a political ideologue. This is a person, as you said, Crystal, that their concerns are being driven by real things. I think the state of the economy is something that we can all relate on, right? And I'm not trying to bring politics into this because I think that our state of our economy goes beyond the two political parties. And I
Yeah.
think we both have contributed to where we are currently. Now it's up to you to figure out what the best way going forward is. And I think most people have expressed that on election day. But fundamentally, again, we all live in this society. If this economy gets worse, we all suffer, no matter what your political stripes is. It doesn't matter what your background or your demographics or whatever else. We're all in the same boat together.
And historically speaking, I mean, there have been lots of people who've had to contend with um a president that they don't like,
Yeah.
or yeah, and they got by just fine. That's how we're here.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, and I blame a lot of this on the media. Like they're not they're not helping to ground the American people in terms of how we should think about what the appropriate next steps are, regardless if you like the person that's coming in or not. We should be, again, as American citizens, our role didn't stop on election day. And the truth is, most of the decisions that are being made that impact our lives, most of the decisions that are being made that impact the ability to integrate and advocate for those with disabilities is actually being made at the local and state level. So our work is not done, regardless of which political party or candidate you support. This work continues. We have to continue to advocate, continue to be aware, continue to understand the decisions that are being made in this bad economy in particular, because hard decisions are going to have to be made.
Right.
And we want to make sure that our interests and our viewpoints are at the table when these hard decisions are being made.
Exactly. Yeah, as I was saying before we got started, it's, at first, Mark and I were like, what do we do? We've been trying to educate and encourage and empower people, and now we're at such a polarized place in America, and well, Mark is lucky right now because he's in Canada, but
Oh, okay.
but but as we're also a couple, so we, ultimately he wants to be here. And of course, these going forth, these things happening here going to affect him as well. You know, so we were discussing, what are we gonna do going forward? Because everything we've worked so hard for to help other people is, you
Make it
know,
erased or go
yeah,
backwards even. Yeah.
yeah. So it's difficult to, okay, uh, regroup and okay, we still want to encourage and educate other advocates that are on the same page we are right now. Like, what do we do now? And as you were stating, it comes to a point where, all these things they seem so big, but it actually happens more on the local level, you know, and that's encouraging because that's going to have a ripple effect.
Agreed. And Mark, I'll safely make this assumption that I know that, and I say this, Canada is also a democracy as well. So I also want to share that my sentiments, even though it's rooted in America, I think applies to Canada and all other democracies as well. These governments were set up to serve our interest. Um,
Right.
And we have to hold our elected officials, particularly our local elected officials, accountable. If there are things that we believe should be happening, we should be letting them know that. Um, and again, so the work does not end when the president, or in the case of Canada, the I'm assuming the majority political party wins. No, it doesn't. Your work doesn't end. Our advocacy doesn't end because
Right.
typically when we stop paying attention, that's when the most important decisions are being made.
Right.
Right.
And it's it's sometimes like we see these great things to be celebrated, like the passing of the ADA, or you know there was a big push for civil rights in the 60s, and they got a lot got a lot done. But I think at the local level, like you mentioned, a lot of people in their own neighborhoods and the places of work are often these cloistered little environments, these little bubbles where that stuff still goes on, and they're not really, and it's hard to deal with sometimes.
It can be. Definitely, it can be. They say all politics is local, and to your point, Mark, things could be more difficult on the local level because, many times humans become comfortable with how things are. Even if they don't like how things are, they're more afraid of what comes next than to change what is
Right.
currently there.
Mhm.
And I think that
Yeah.
is a fair thing that we all have to be very cognizant of and figure out how we properly navigate that. That is a fair point.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, kind of ironic because every 4 years we'll celebrate people at the Olympics, let's say, for having the courage to jump off a mountain or jump in a pool, you know? And but that all started with like one moment of courage for to get out of your shell to do something that you thought might be possible, but you weren't really quite sure.
Right.
And we all have to take that step
Mhm.
somehow.
Mhm.
But you said the key word courage, courage to not just be at the Olympics, but do all the work that you need to be done before you got there, right? The courage to wake up every day and devote a certain amount of time to practicing, the courage to try out, the courage to know that you're making the sacrifice and you won't be able to go to the movies or be able to eat your favorite candy and all this other stuff. So you're right. And I think it's the same level of courage that goes into the work of advocating for the things that we believe in. It's the courage to do the small things and sometimes the big things, but on a consistent basis. That's how we create change over time. And I think it's also important to mention, as we think about what comes next with this new administration, that humans and human history is just filled with cycles. And one cycle influences the other. Mark, you brought up the very good point about the success that America experienced in the 60s and 70s during the civil rights movement. But we also have to remember there was a backlash to that in the 80s when it came to the Reaganomics and all of that. So that was the counter cycle. We saw the importance of focusing on civil rights, equity, particularly in the context or the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd, right? But now we're starting to see this conservative cycle take place, more conservative cycle taking place not only in the United States, but I'm also hearing Canada. I'm also hearing in certain parts of Western Europe. So we also have to take a step back and see and say, what cycle are we going through, or what cycle do we see coming up next? Because all cycles ultimately burn themselves out, either because they were successful or it's just because humans after a while need something new. So
Right.
as we think about the work that we're collectively doing to make our societies better, we also have to recognize the cycles that are happening in the background.
Right. You're muted. Mark, you're muted.
Sorry. Sorry, I forgot I was on mute. Um, there's one movie quote that I really like, which gives me hope, and I feel can could be the same for other people in that this movie with Sean Connery a long time ago says a tiger is fiercest when it knows it's about to die, right? So in the same way, some of these people are holding on to control or power so much. Some of the pushback that we're seeing is because they know they're on the way out.
Mm, very insightful.
Mhm.
Very
Yeah.
insightful statement. And I think there's
It,
a
it is, it, but at the same time, it's important not to dwell too much on that, but be able to say, okay, these are excellent things that are coming up, and I want to leave my legacy and not be somebody combative in the end of my power, or however you want to see it, but be able to work together, collaborate, and your legacy is left with saying, okay, this I feel good about this. Let's put some of this stuff that I've tried to work for and some of the things that didn't work, push them out and let new come in, you know.
Hmm. I think we can all work to try to be more evolved, where to your point, Crystal, we would take a more pragmatic approach when we realizing our time, and everyone has a certain amount of time. Our time is up, whether it's our time is up in power, our time is up in terms of our life cycle, our time is up in any other aspect of life. So I think that's something we can all work towards. Because I think to the opposite, in terms of what Mark was saying, is unfortunately the truth more often than not, which means that things typically get worse or are the worst at the end before everything changes.
I think actually kind of butchered that quote a little bit. He says tigers are at the most dangerous. So I think, while I still maintain that's hopeful in that we know the end is coming, it also means that we need to be a bit more, as advocates, we need to be a bit more aware and vigilant because they're getting desperate because
Yeah.
they're on the way out and they're gonna, depending on how close they are to that perceived end, they're gonna maybe do some things that might be uncomfortable.
Right.
Mm, mm.
And I think it's
Scary
like that
words.
for yeah.
I don't even want to reflect on that.
I
Yeah.
think it's like that for any generation or anybody that's getting older, losing abilities or whatever, situation, um, is to be fearful of the unknown.
Yeah.
But, it all comes down to the ability to how your character, you know, and how you emotionally deal with it. Are you going to hide away and be scared and, you know, or are you going to do things to make things happen and implement that and make it into your life and make it a your purpose? You know, you have to decide those things.
Yes.
I think the way forward, maybe one possible way forward, is uh, say the people that are going ahead and making changes, like maybe the new generation that's coming up, instead of being afraid um and hiding yourself away, isolating, or becoming entrenched in your own viewpoint and not budging. Um, Maybe communicate with the other side and say, this is what I'm afraid of. And maybe they take that and say, oh, I didn't realize that, and this is what we can do to alleviate that fear or whatever. I don't know. Just an idea.
Wow.
But if you're in a place, say like in the government or, just older generation, and you're stuck and adamant about, I like this place of power. I like this situation I'm in. I've been benefited from belittling people and being racist and ableist and things like that. I have those comforts because of my arrogance. You know, if you were adamant about staying in that place, then that's going to be your legacy. And that's a terrible legacy to leave.
Mm. I think that is a powerful narrative, particularly for people such as, more powerful people who are concerned about their legacy. Like, you know, what type of impact do you want to leave on this earth for your kids, for the upcoming generations?
For your grandkids, for everybody, for the world. I mean, we are all here for a purpose.
That is true.
And you've lived out your purpose as whatever congressperson, you know, um, just being a human in general, we all have a purpose. Um, and we have to come to the realization that when we come to the end of our time here on earth, uh, we have to leave a legacy and make sure that our grandchildren, not just our family, but also the people around us, are left with skills and the things they need to advance society. Where else, what was your life for? What was your service for?
Mm. Powerful words.
So was
You know,
there anything else, Dwayne, that you wanted to promote or any projects you're working on at YPO?
Well, I will say that YPO, also known as Young Presidents Organization, we are a global organization that represents CEOs or CEO equivalents. We have over 36,000 members globally on every single continent on this earth, which includes nearly 500 brick and mortar chapters. And I can definitely say that we are doing a lot of work to impact diversity and inclusion in terms of our membership and the membership experience. But again, this work is a reflection of people. This is people relations, and this is ultimately about working with people. So my only message is for all the individuals who are advocates, all the individuals who understand the importance of that diversity, equity, and inclusion, understand the importance of making sure that every person in society has the equal opportunity to contribute and find value and find self-worth. Um, Remember, politics isn't something that impacts you. Politics is a process that you are a part of. So, regardless of how you feel about the recent presidential elections, how you feel about the political situation where you live, you are a citizen, you live in a democracy, you have a role to play. So, you continue to do the work that you do. Pay attention to what's happening. Pay attention to who the mayor or the mayor equivalent is, your city council, your town council, what's happening in your state or province. Because at the end of the day, you have a role to play in this overall process, and you have a role to play in making our society better.
you had said we talked about a lot of things that was there anything that we talked about previously that we didn't just discuss that you want to
Ooh,
dive into?
ooh. Well, we talked about a number of different topics during the pre-interview. I think we
Mm,
covered most of them today. Like I
yeah,
shared my
I
story.
think so too. I just wanted to make sure with you, like, did we miss anything? I don't think so.
Well, I put to you like this: if we did miss anything, I'd be more than happy to come back on the podcast to speak
Awesome,
with
awesome.
you. But I think we covered everything.
Mark, do you have anything else?
No,
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been so impactful. I love talking to people like you that can really dive into these really difficult topics that humanity is facing right now.
Mhm.
Uh, Specifically, these topics, American topics. No, it's difficult, but they're necessary.
They are. And it all goes back to human. I think these are human topics. This speaks to the human condition and this speaks to whether or not we collectively want to make the world a better place and really want this world to be a place where we all can find value in our humanity and also our purpose on this earth. Crystal, Mark, I just want to thank both of you for giving me the opportunity to come on your podcast to speak with you about my passion in terms of advocating for the individuals who identify as having disabilities, my passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also share my thoughts on politics. And like I said, I really enjoyed the experience.
Thank you so
thanks for
much.
joining us, Twain.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye. Hey guys, thanks for watching and don't forget to encourage, educate, and empower someone today. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this because these are really important conversations. Bye.
Bye.